Parenting tip number 1. Give your child a ranged weapon, because they're way too weak for any melee options.
You seem to know your way around a gun. You reckon you can handle that?
Well, I sort of shot a rifle before.
Wait for my mark. Relax. Do not think of it as an animal.
I mean, with one of these. First, don't be afraid of it. It's just a thing. Take it. But know where your finger is all the time. And don't put it on the trigger unless you want to hurt somebody.
Okay.
I know this advice may sound a little absurd, but only if you haven't played any of the recent games that explore the concept of fatherhood. You see, today's games are rarely about lone warriors with unlimited ammo anymore. Instead, now we often have protagonists who are flawed. Real human beings with emotional complexity who often find themselves in the role of a struggling protector rather than the invincible savior. It's an evolution that has fascinated me for some time. And in this essay, I want to explore how and why games are embracing the imperfect, emotionally complicated father figure as the new face of our heroes. And most of all, what exactly does that say about us as gamers? But first, let me back up a little. I was 13 when I saved the galaxy for the first time. Holding that massive Xbox One controller, I remember pushing Master Chief through wave after wave of aliens and undead in Halo 1. And Master Chief never once spoke about his past, nor revealed even a hint of self-doubt. Hidden beneath his golden visor, I'm certain his face was carved from stone and utterly emotionless. And this is exactly what the designers at Bungie wanted. A blank canvas onto which we could project our own images of bravery. Looking back on it, it's clear Halo 1 was part of the golden age of the lone wolf protagonist, accompanied by titles like Doom 3, Medal of Honor, Far Cry, and the early Call of Duty games. Influenced by military sci-fi, blockbuster action films, and a collective admiration for the untouchable hero, these characters single-handedly saved humanity without ever betraying any sense of vulnerability. Now, fast forward 17 years, and we have this touching, subtle scene from the early moments of God of War.
No. Finish what you started.
I can't.
This scene and Kratos' hesitation to comfort his son perfectly captures his shift from the absolute embodiment of rage in prior God of War titles into a father who's now suddenly unsure of himself. Kratos' inability to commit to a decision reframes fatherhood as an ambiguous territory rather than an automatic virtue. And Kratos knows that Atreus must learn to survive. But the gravity of teaching him to kill forces Kratos to wrestle with the risk of passing on his own anger and violence to his impressionable son. This moment doesn't just redefine Kratos' character into one with vulnerability, it makes him into a human, one that's relatable to the player. But before I go any farther, a quick note on spoilers. This essay does have some plot reveals, and I'll be discussing themes from popular titles like The Last of Us, The Walking Dead, God of War, and Red Dead Redemption, among others. Thus, if you're completely new to these games, you may catch some spoilers, so consider this your warning. The pivot from the one-dimensional power fantasies of the early 2000s towards more emotionally complex protagonists likely happened for a number of reasons. But most notably, I think it's a combination of improving technology and graphics that allowed for better character expression, along with broader cultural shifts. Studios began experimenting with narrative-driven formats, and critics and fans were supporting games that tackled moral gray areas. Developers themselves, many of whom had grown older and had families of their own, started weaving their own personal experiences into the stories, and many players who grew up gaming were now able to resonate with these stories as well.
You like it?
Honey, it's
What?
nice, but I think it's stuck. It's not.
What? No. Oh, ha ha.
Where did you get the money for this?
Drugs. I sell hardcore drugs.
Oh, good. You started helping out with the mortgage then.
Yeah, you wish.
Listen to this interview by Cory Barlog, the creative director of God of War, and how he describes how becoming a father influenced this new direction for Kratos.
Is the father-son relationship just completely central to this experience, would you say?
That was the core building block, right? Like, that's where all of this began. It began with that idea of, like, all right, he is a character that everybody feels they knows very well, right? That Kratos is the sort of one-note vengeance man, and we needed a reason, I think, for him to change, or desire to change, right? And I had my son, and there was a shift in me that I want to actually be a better person in some ways. A bit more patient, right? And it's a constant struggle, a journey, just like the journey that he has.
Neil Druckmann, the writer and creative director for The Last of Us, pointed out that the father-daughter dynamic was central to the game since its very inception, with the emotional weight of protecting Ellie driving the game's moral dilemmas. Listen to his description of what it feels like to be a father.
In hindsight, how would you describe the themes of the story so far?
No, it's just been kind of a wild ride. And, you say certain things when you market a game versus what it might actually be about. But I remember the moment we first started talking about The Last of Us at Naughty Dog, my earliest conversation with Bruce Straley, my directing partner, we're talking about creating an experience of the unconditional love a parents feel for their child. And that love is so primal, biological, that it can make you do really wonderful things. It can make you feel the most intense happiness you've ever felt in your life. Like, sometimes people ask me, "Oh, what is it like to have a kid? Do you feel anything new?" And I'm like, "No, it's the same feelings but it's much more intense version of those." So it's a kind of joy you've never known before, but it's a kind of fear you've never known before either, and a kind of pain. And a parent's greatest fear is losing their child.
These developers didn't choose fatherhood randomly. They saw it as a vehicle for self-expression and to also elevate their protagonists from mere killing machines to layered individuals forced to weigh the consequences of their actions. Taking a closer look at The Last of Us, the opening sequences of this game immediately established Joel as a father confronting a catastrophic, life-altering tragedy. And for those of you who may be interested, I've already made a separate video analyzing how this introduction is nothing short of a modern masterpiece in video game storytelling. The emotional toll of losing his daughter leaves Joel withdrawn during the years that follow. And when Ellie arrives in his life, it's important to note that she is not a welcome addition, and is instead a reluctant obligation for Joel. Throughout a majority of the game, Joel doesn't allow himself to get attached, and views her as just another smuggling job. Yet, this forced dynamic quickly grows to become the central point of the entire story. A man hardened by loss must confront his capacity to care again, realizing that opening himself up to Ellie's well-being could be his greatest vulnerability, but also his path to redemption. Though firefights and scavenging for resources still remain core to the gameplay loop, the deeper stakes arise from Joel's internal struggle. Can he afford to protect someone in a world that has punished him so brutally for caring in the past? But why fatherhood specifically? Why not other types of relationships? One reason might be the already well-established cultural notion of the male warrior. As I previously described, older games worshipped this archetype. By simply inserting a child into the arms of these protagonists, creators now get to keep the outward shell of the unstoppable fighter while injecting him with internal conflict. And what I find most interesting above all about these figures is that being a father is not what they initially wanted. They're forced into the fatherhood situation due to circumstances entirely out of their control. Joel doesn't want to relive fatherhood. Kratos repeatedly states raising Atreus was supposed to be the mother's job, not his. Their reluctance towards fatherhood preserves that old lone wolf tension we once celebrated, but adds a new dimension, albeit at times a thinly veiled one. Furthermore, parenthood stands out because it taps into powerful emotional undercurrents. Even if we don't have children, many of us understand that protective instinct, or that fear of failing someone who relies on us. As Neil Druckmann describes, these games speak to primal impulses. We've learned to compete for high scores and speed runs, but protecting a child is built into our DNA. Instead of the entire universe is at stake, it's now save this one life, and that hits a bit differently. Additionally, demographics likely play a pretty significant role, as a large portion of the big budget development teams and gamer audiences are men, thus making stories about fatherhood a bit more accessible to the general audience. While there are some examples of female providers in the gaming world, with A Plague Tale readily coming to mind, I do hope to see more games with motherhood stories or alternative family structures in the future, especially as gamers and developers are only becoming a more diverse group. When looked through an introspective lens, this shift towards fatherhood raises even more interesting questions about how we, as gamers, perceive masculinity. In these dad-focused narratives, vulnerability is no longer a liability. It's central to our hero's growth. We see protagonists who kill when threatened, but actually worry more about failing those who depend on them. And that tension challenges the notion that strength and tenderness can't coexist. By making fatherhood a focal point, developers are inviting a more mature brand of masculinity, one that values empathy and care alongside physical dominance. These dads can still swing an axe or fire a shotgun, but they're also grappling with guilt, responsibility, and the fear of passing their worst traits down to the next generation. It's a significant departure from the old school, strong, silent type, pointing to an evolving understanding of what being manly means in both the digital and the real world. In Telltale's The Walking Dead, fatherhood is transformed into a sort of interactive moral experiment rather than a static plot device. As Lee Everett, players don't simply protect Clementine. They're continually shaping her worldview with each critical decision that's made in real time. Unlike more linear narratives, here the consequences of being a protector are immediately visible in Clementine's reactions, challenging the idea that a father figure's violence or ethical compromise can be brushed aside under the excuse of fatherly protection. This interactive dynamic raises a big question. Does the label of being a dad grant characters too much moral leeway? Following this train of thought, I think it's important that we consider how fatherhood might be considered a cheap mechanic used to emotionally manipulate us gamers. Suppose you have a character like John Marston in the first Red Dead Redemption. He's a man who's known nothing but crime. He's robbed, he's killed, and he's probably done worse than that. But the moment we see him teaching his son to ride a horse or fussing over family life, we soften. We say, he's not so bad, he's just trying to keep his family safe. But this can become a narrative shortcut, turning an otherwise violent anti-hero into someone we're ready to forgive. Joel at the end of The Last of Us does horrible things, possibly dooming the remainder of all mankind by preventing the development of a vaccine and then lying to Ellie's face about it.
You keep finding something to fight for. Now, I know that's not what you want to hear right now.
Swear to me.
But as players, we might let it slide because of the fatherly bond that we formed with Ellie throughout the game, and letting her die feels unthinkable. Some would consider this emotional manipulation. Show a big tough man cradling a frightened child, and all prior transgressions are forgiven. If done carelessly, it risks cheap sentimentality, an emotional get-out-of-jail-free card for characters who'd otherwise be irredeemable. However, if done properly, these stories don't let the father figure skate by on paternal devotion alone. Joel's final choice is intentionally messy, leaving us debating to this day whether fatherly love does allow you to cross such ethical boundaries.
You just come after her.
Kratos in God of War rethinks his entire identity because teaching his son the old god-slaying ways might doom the boy to a life of rage. So he struggles with the idea that fatherhood can't erase his own sins, but at least it might stop them from repeating again. These narratives use fatherhood not simply as a way to absolve characters, but rather to complicate them, to show us that empathy and violence can live side by side in the same person. So maybe handing your kid a ranged weapon is not actually good parenting advice, but it does capture in a way how far gaming has come. No longer content with blank slate heroes who never question their actions, today's biggest stories revolve around flawed protagonists torn between protecting someone they love and facing their own darkness. Yes, some games use fatherhood as a cheap sympathy card. But at its best, this narrative device elevates both the stakes and the emotional depth. It pushes us to think about empathy, vulnerability, and the messy overlap between violence and love. When done right, these paternal arcs remind us that even the toughest warrior can't outrun the responsibility of shaping a new life. And while I do hope future games push this concept much farther, the shift towards protagonists with complexity has already proven how a well-told story can resonate with its audience when it dares to reveal the heart within the hero. For those of you who've made it this far, thank you for your time. And as always, please let me know your thoughts, especially if you have a different perspective. I always read all the comments and love hearing your feedback. So take care, and I'll see you later.